an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Sabriel. Chapters 19, 20, 21, and 22. In these chapters, Sabriel reaches Belisare and finds out that the system that the scavengers use in order to go outside of the city limits into the areas that are haunted by the dead is really exploitative, horrible, and needs to be stopped. But she doesn't quite have time to deal with it yet because she still needs to find her dad. And that winds up being a pretty cool journey into death. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. So, yeah, guys, I want to warn you all ahead of time. I am getting over being ill. And Abbey, who commissioned this episode, I got in touch with her, making sure that it was cool that I move around my appointments and stuff. I think this one I was able to leave where it was. But I have been having some problems with my voice. It seems like my voice is almost completely back, but it seemed like that yesterday. And then once I started, I got about an hour and a half out of it before it really started to die on me. And I'm just, trying to warn everybody at the beginning of the recordings today that I may wind up losing my voice partway through and have to cut it short, in which case I will add that time on to the next recording and make it up. So I don't think that's going to happen, but I just want to let you know. So yeah, these chapters are pretty cool. I had been really curious about what death was like, and we don't go all the way to the seventh gate, but we are able to get a sense of the sort of theme, I guess. Obviously, it's water river based, but it's a really interesting escalation as we continue to go further and further in. And I'm always interested in different authors' interpretations of death. I have been, I'm somebody who often thinks about what it's like after death, if there's anything at all, and if there is, what's it like? And I find it really interesting to see what different people come up with, because some of it sounds like they genuinely maybe think this is what it's going to be. And other stuff is, of course, created for the sake of the story. And either way, who knows, and there are such different vibes you can go with. The way that death is described in these books is very impersonal. It's a landscape that does not have people in it. It's a landscape that leads to something else, and then that leads to something else 7 times in a row. So none of this is really death in terms of it being final until you go past 7. And what is 7 like? That's where we get into really what does, quote, the afterlife look like. And I wonder if we'll ever see that. I feel like we have to get there at some point. But I feel like earlier in this book, Sabriel specifically said that if you pass 7, you're not coming back. So either she finds a way around that, or she takes the risk and manages to come back, or not, manages to partially come back perhaps. Because her father, even in 5, is not able to completely come back. She realizes. So I think that's a really fascinating series of, and I'd love to see if somebody has done an illustration of death, because it's sort of, I had been thinking of it as gates horizontally, you walk you would walk through gates on a farm, right? You walk through one gate and then you're done. But the way that this is, is there drop downs like manholes, like drains in the ground. So I think it would be a pretty cool illustration to see if somebody did the 7 levels, you know. It's almost like the 7 circles of hell, except there's nothing really hellish about them. It just is what it is. There's no punishment happening. There's no, you know, there are creatures occasionally, but the creatures aren't there like by accident. It doesn't feel like they're part of the landscape. They're there because somebody sent them. So yeah, I don't know. I'm really like, my imagination is tickled by this whole concept of death. But I'm getting ahead of myself because that happens later. Chapter 19 starts off with, Sabriel had expected Belissaire to be a ruined city, devoid of life, but it was not so. Well, not just you, Sabriel. I definitely thought that also. I 100% expected Belissaire to be completely empty. So imagine my surprise. There's all kinds of people. There's boats, people fishing. There's a market. There's people haggling, walking around. There's kids swimming. It's a genuine, like, little city. And I couldn't figure, like, you know, at first they pull up to, in their ship, they pull up to one of the docks, and this kid grabs the rope and ties them up. And, you know, we're having this moment of like some kid being like the first contact that they have had with a peaceful place since she started out, pretty much. And I'm thinking, oh, how nice. But it says immediately that she had to force a smile. And I'm like, well, what the hell? And then it turns out she can feel tons of dead here. And I'm like, oh, fucking come on. Like, even this place where there's still people alive, where things are still like working out, it's not really working out. It turns out that it's like they're functioning within a terrible, encroaching darkness. And the way that they have decided to function within it is pretty ugly. And I shouldn't say they, because that implies the entire town is in on it. And it turns out that this thing that she discovers later is really mostly scavengers. But I can't help but think that the town has to know about it. There's no way that they're completely unaware, and they must just be letting it happen, right? I don't know. I'm really like, I'm gonna withhold judgment, but I don't feel like they're going through any effort to hide it. So I have to assume that they know what these scavengers are doing. So she asks Touchstone if it was like this before. And he says, not really. The pool was normally full with bigger ships, and there were warehouses here, not a market. It was quieter, too, and people were in less of a rush. And, of course, you know, once we know that there are dead all over the place, it makes sense that they're in a rush because they're trying to get everything done before nightfall. So, and he says it was also a lot cleaner. I think we should find an inn or a hostelry, somewhere to stay for the night. So they get into the town, and she's a little bit like worried that maybe some of the dead are actually mixed in with the people. But as they continue in, she's becoming a little bit more relaxed because it seems like there aren't any dead actually amongst the living. They're all separated and being kept at bay somewhere outside the town. And there's a lot of sexual tension in this section, between Sabriel and Touchstone, who we find out is like the bastard son of the king somehow later. This is the kind of thing that, like, part of me, you know, I'm always really reluctant to give a shit about romance in stories. But in this case, even though I don't particularly care too much about Touchstone, I'm not invested in him as a person. There's nothing about him that makes me think, oh, you and Sabriel would be really good together in particular. It definitely has the vibe of just like, he's a dude who's competent, who got paired up with her, and because they're, heterosexual and opposite sexes, they must inevitably start to look at each other a certain way. And I get a little impatient with that, I will admit. However, Sabriel has been put through the ringer so bad, so quickly, and so remorselessly that I can't help but just want her to have some happiness. So in that respect, I am kind of rooting for them just because of it being something that makes her happy. It's not about it. What I'm trying to say here is it's not about Touchstone. It's about Sabriel. And if it turns out to not be Touchstone, I'm fine with it. He is not somebody that I particularly care about right now. I'm glad that he's competent. I'm glad that he has her back and seems to genuinely mean it. I'm glad that he is aware of the way to handle people in ways that she isn't, so he can fill in those gaps. That's cool. But in terms of really liking him as a person, has not happened yet. And I can't help but think it feels a little forced to have her being this sort of jealous already. I don't feel like this rings true. It's not even like the idea of the two of them together is moving too fast. It's more that, I don't know, there's just been so little time spent in their heads with them relaxed, having the time to look at each other in that way, that everything has been so plot driven, and it feels a tiny bit rushed, if that makes sense. But regardless, they go to this inn. They get led there by a kid, I think, who's they've paid because they have to keep giving out bribes or tips, depending on how you say it. And it's a place called Sign of Three Lemons. And they are a little bit worried about what it's going to be like. But once they get there, it's actually really nice. And there is a charter magic in the square that keeps 3 huge lemon trees constantly blooming and heavy with fruit, which sounds awesome. I have always wanted a lemon tree. I actually bought one for my grandmother as a gift, right before she died. And I had wanted to take it back, to have as a reminder of her, because she was so into lemon trees. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to get back in time, and I don't know what happened to it. But this sounds so lovely, a square that has these huge trees in it that smells like lemons. It's the best. I actually have a lemon-scented Bath and Body Works air freshener, and it's one of my favorites because it's so nice. So here comes one of my usual favorite things always, which is our adventurers who are hot and sweaty and dirty and disgusting finally get to have a bath and a rest. I am all about it. And this turns into a kind of a weird situation because, bless her heart, she is so jealous of what she thinks is Touchstone banging the maid next door that she cannot even concentrate and enjoy her bath, which honestly, it was so awkward because I really took her at her word that that was him next door. She thinks that she recognizes his voice. Through the wall, she could hear a man's, Touchstone's, voice. Then water gurgling, that maid giggling. Sabriel stopped soaping and concentrated on the sound. It was hard to hear, but there was more giggling, a deep, indistinct male voice, then a loud splash, like two bodies in a bath rather than one. So, yeah, I really listened to her when I should not have. It turns out this is not Touchstone, but I listened to her and thought it was, and I was like, well, damn, Touchstone, I guess you're just going to get it in right away. Which, I mean, he has been turned into wood, pun intended, for 200 years. He probably does want to bang. I can't even be mad at that. But also, dude, like, there is a time and place, but also, maybe this is the time and place. That time and place implies do it when you have some downtime, somewhere you can be private, and this is some downtime where he can be private. So, maybe this is just fine, and I shouldn't even be, like, surprised. But I was, and then it turns out it's not him. And the fact that Mogget is the one to tell her leads me to believe that Mogget has a sense of how she started to look at Touchstone. Probably Mogget has a sense of how Touchstone has started to look at her later on. And I can't help but wonder if Touchstone is going to be a bit of a matchmaker here, or if he's going to be like, this is a real bad idea. We don't have time for this. Please don't. I'll be very alert to what Mogget decides to do with this information and how he reacts to this. But yeah, this like, it becomes pretty clear that the people next door to her are fucking, and Sabriel like dunks her head underwater so that she doesn't have to listen to it. And down there, she's thinking to herself, what did it matter? She didn't think of Touchstone in that way. Sex was the last thing on her mind. Just another complication, contraception, messiness, emotions. There were enough problems. Concentrate on planning. Think ahead. It was just because Touchstone was the first young man she'd met out of school, that was all. It was none of her business. She didn't even know his real name. So, yeah, she's over here thinking about contraception and everything. I really wonder if you're an Abhorsen, are you able to, like, could you basically be your own plan B? If you can control life and death, can you, like, sense that you're pregnant and be like, I don't think so? And, like, do a self-administered magical abortion? Because that'd be handy. But anyway, so she is alerted to Mogget coming into the room. And he says, I just thought you might like to know that Touchstone's room is that way. It hasn't got a bathtub, so he'd like to know if he can use yours when you're finished. He's waiting downstairs in the meantime, getting the local news. And she's like, oh, yeah, okay. And she gets out and gets dressed and goes downstairs, and she is in like such a great mood now that she knows that he's not out here banging the maid. And he's like a little confused as to how her mood has improved so much. But I have to say, it shouldn't be that big a mystery, dude, because even if she hadn't thought you were banging a maid and then found out you weren't, she's finally clean and you're finally safe and y'all get to rest. And I feel like that should be enough for you to know why she's in a decent mood all of a sudden. I've just had it refilled. Mogget's in the room, by the way. I hope you don't mind. Why would I mind? I just want to get clean, that's all. Good. I'll organize for dinner to be served in your room so we can plan as we eat. So they get together in the evening, and she says, and I have to ask this question. I'm very curious if anybody, let's see who's in the audience. We have Jason Fagan here. Hi, Jason. Jason's the only one here. And Jason, if you can't answer this, is fine. Somebody may be able to tell me later. But she says, I think the most likely place to find my father's body will be at that place where the queen was slain, the reservoir. Why? I do not understand how she makes this leap, that that's where her father's body is going to be. And I don't, like, because the whole thing that went down with the queen and Touchstone and all of that was 200 years ago. I don't know if it's supposed to be that she, like, I guess she assumes Kerrigor took her dad, and so he's using that same spot as a source of power again, I guess. Which I suppose makes sense. I don't know. But I'm curious about all of your theories on that, because I was a little bit surprised that that was what she decided. And considering that that is what she decides, I figure that she must, like, I would have thought that she'd have been more prepared for the trap that winds up being sprung on them. But it seems like, I guess to a point, you can't, like, when you've only got, Touchstone and Mogget at your disposal, how prepared can you actually get? So I guess what I'm saying is, I'm saying she should have been more prepared, but what would that even look like? So maybe I'm being a little hard on her. Jason says, I'm not sure. Either I've forgotten something, or maybe she has some intuition based on how and where she enters death. Maybe. It's not mentioned here. But anyway, that's what she decides. And Touchstone is like, well, there are a lot of ways to get there, but all of them require us to leave this valley that is so carefully guarded. And I forgot to mention that on the way to the inn that they're staying at, she realizes that they have, like, built this city so that there are aqueducts, and that way nothing can cross over the running water. And the aqueducts have been cleared out to such a degree that they can have a lot of people guarding them, and it won't be crowding the edges or put them in danger. So it's a pretty decent system that they've got worked out, actually. And Touchstone is talking to her about getting there and says, it's also the most dangerous place for us to go. Charter magic will be greatly warped, including our various bindings, and there is a chance that our enemy, Kerrigor, interrupted Sabriel. But he may not be there. Even if he is, we may be able to sneak in. We might be able to sneak around the edges, said Touchstone. The reservoir is enormous, and there are hundreds of columns. But wading is noisy, and the water is very still. Sound carries, and the six, they're in the very center. If I can find my father and bring his spirit back to his body, Sabriel said stubbornly, then we can deal with whatever confronts us. That is the first thing. My father. Everything else is just a complication that's followed on. So, Mogget, I take it your master plan is to sneak in as far as we can, find your father's body, which will hopefully be tucked away in some safe corner, and then see what happens? And essentially, he ends it with, wow, that's a really brilliant plan. And Sabriel snaps at him and is like, do you have a fucking better idea? Seriously, do you have anything to offer? Because I'm wide open to suggestions, but I don't hear any. And Mogget finally kind of pipes down. I was like, well, I guess. And she makes sure to say, like, we're going to go in the middle of the day, because even though it's underground, there are some openings that let sunshine in, which can be some kind of protection. Not hugely helpful, but it's not nothing. But as we see later, if clouds go over the sky, it's just kind of rendered moot. So he tells her he doesn't have anything better to offer, and they decide that they're going to head out tomorrow. So this is when we find out what's going on with the, what do you call it? I forgot the word that I want. Scavengers. Thank you, book, for reminding me. These scavengers are periodically let out past the guards into the much more dangerous areas in the northern hills of the city, where everything has been abandoned and there are dead hiding in, like, all of the shadows. And they are using this, like, fucking horrifying system. Oh, Abby's here. Hi, Abbey. They're using this horrifying system to distract the dead by getting a bunch of manacled children together and using them as bait so that the dead will leave them alone to do whatever they need with their scavenging while feasting, one assumes, on innocent children. Which, that's horrifying. I mean, damn. This book really, this book goes unexpectedly hard at times. It's like, it constantly sort of surprises me. And I've been trying to put my finger on why. And I'm realizing it's because Sabriel is so young and she's the main character. If Sabriel was one of a series of POV characters, I might be more prepared for this. But because of it being Sabriel as the main character, I always feel like this is sort of like a YA book. And I would argue it still is. But that's pretty dark. You know, like a lot of what comes up in this story so far has been surprisingly dark. And I keep thinking that like we've reached the worst of it with like the Mordicants and, you know, that fucking thing growing out of a guy's back last section. But then there's stuff like this where little children are being used as bait. And then I'm like, never mind. You totally did not go as hard as you could. Gore crows. That was pretty rad. But yeah, I keep being caught sort of off guard by how intensely bleak parts of the story are. And I kind of need to like get myself a little bit more like in the headspace, because that's what this book has shown me repeatedly, is that I'm underestimating its capacity for dark, but I'm still kind of like trusting that, oh, well, that's probably about as bad as it gets, and then backing off. I want this to be a romp, I guess, and that's not what it is. This is serious shit. So she is hiding the fact, first of all, that she's a necromancer, which I found interesting. I'm not really totally sure why she's worried about them finding out, like what she thinks is going to happen. If she thinks maybe that like there's some spies amongst the living or something. But whatever it is, she is keeping herself to herself. And when she sees these little slave children, her instinct is to immediately react with like doing something to try and save these kids. But Mogget, who is riding on her shoulders, fucking claws her in the neck and like the throat a little bit and is like, bitch, you are literally nothing up against what, 30 people? Doubt it. You're not going to do it. You need to bide your time, figure out somewhere, someplace at a later date where you can have an effect, and be patient, because the only thing you're going to do right now is get yourself killed, and that is not going to help these kids at all. So fucking chill for a second, think this through, reevaluate what you want to do. And she's like, fine. So they decide that they are going to go ahead and proceed to the cave first and get that done. Because as far as she's concerned, trying to save these kids, like, that might interfere, that might make it so that she is rendered unable to go after her dad afterwards. And that's like out of the question. So they decide that that is the priority. And I really agree. I understand why she wants to do what she was about to do. I really, really get it. But Mogget's right. And this whole thing, I'm going to read this. Past the aqueduct and the soothing barrier of running water, Sabriel felt the immediate presence of the dead. They were all around in the ruined houses, in cellars and drains, lurking anywhere the light didn't reach, dormant, waiting for the night while the sun shone. In many ways, the dead of Belisarius were direct counterparts of the scavengers. Hiding by day, they took what they could by night. There were many, many dead in Belisarius, but they were weak, cowardly, and jealous. Their combined appetite was enormous, but the supply of victims sadly limited. Every morning saw scores of them lose their hold on life to fall back into death. But more always came. So yeah, Sabriel is just really shocked at how many there are. And I have to feel like this is connected to Kerrigor and him doing that like ritual and breaking so many charter stones close by. But that remains to be seen. So let's see. Oh yeah, they pass by the palace, which has been burned to a husk. And Mogget says that the last regent burned it. It was becoming infested with the dead, despite all the guards and wards that various visiting abhorsons put up. They say the regent went mad and tried to burn them out. What happened to him? Asked Sabriel. Her, actually, replied Mogget. She died in the fire, or the dead took her, and that marked the end of any attempt at governing the kingdom. Now, allow me to pause for a reflective drink of orange juice to clear my throat as I present you my theory. Dat bitch ain't dead. Now, hear me out. When a story ends with, they say she died in the fire, or basically if any story ends with, they doubtless are dead. We don't have a body. We didn't see a body. There was no confirmation, but of course they must be dead. I am not buying it. Now, it has been hundreds of years, granted. However, here fucking Touchstone is. So, something. Either she didn't die in that fire and went on to do something else. She's still alive, somehow. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, maybe I'm wrong. But any time that a story ends that way, with a sort of ambiguity, I just assume they're still alive. You know, whatever. Maybe I'm wrong. I might be wrong. But I'm going to hold on to that for now. Because it's fun. I like to have hope. Okay? And I love the fact that the regent was just like, I'm going to burn the palace down. Like, that's hardcore. Most people would not be willing to do that. I mean, even Mogget's like, oh, it was a really nice building. I had some really nice brunches there. Like, it's just, you know, I'm interested in this story. I want to know more about that. I wonder if this author wrote a prequel. So they decide that they are going to go through the entrance that's through the park fence. He says there's an entrance to the reservoir in one of the ornamental caves in the park. Jason says there's a prequel, Clariel. Huh. All right. Sounds a little bit too much like a hair product or something. Clairol and L'Oreal. I think that's what I'm mixing together. It came out 20 years after the trilogy. Abbey saying this at the same time. It's set much longer ago than this, though. Wow. 20 years after the trilogy, but set way, way before. Interesting. Huh. That's fun. Okay. All right. So, they start heading down into the water. Now, I'm about to get into my phobias. So, I do not like... Jason says it's also way darker. Really? Well, I might have to check that out. Guys, this section... I don't know how many of you are aware. I covered Star Wars for Unspoiled because I had never seen them. And I was spoiled on, you know, some obvious stuff, but I had never actually seen them. And when I went to watch the first one with Owen, I realized that I had seen the first one, but I didn't remember anything about it. My mom took me to see it when it came back out in theaters when I was a kid. The only thing that I remembered was the trash compactor scene, and that they are all like knee deep in trash water, and there is a creature in the water. And I remember as a kid being so effing flipped out. Like, I was squirming up in my chair, hiding my face. Like, the idea of being in water that's that shallow, so it's like, it's not even like you could drown. Like, you could drown technically, but that's not going to happen. But you're still so vulnerable that it could bite your foot off. It could do whatever. You don't know because you can't see. And there's something alive in it. I couldn't handle that. And then the walls start closing in, and I was like, okay, I'm out. Because basically, it was just too much stress. It's like in, when you guys, when you watched, what is it? The first Fellowship of the Ring? You know the part when they're coming out of the mines of Moria, and fucking like Gandalf they're like running, and they come to this like spot where they're on the edge of a precipice, and then it starts to fall, and as they're falling, they're fucking goblins like shooting arrows at them. It's too much. There are too many things happening, too many things that you could like be killed by and go wrong. This moment in this book, the water is the only thing that's happening, and it was so tense and horrible that I hated it. Like, I was almost gratified in the end that the dead start coming in through the door, because I really expected dead to rise up from underneath them, and there's no way they could know that was going to happen. They can't be ready for that. They can't see. It's dark. And granted, the dead do start to come through the water at them, so it's not like that's better in the end. If they come at you from below, I guess it is better because you can defend yourself more from the front than from below. But I swear to God, this, like, the whole, when we get here, so I'm going to read this part. They go down there, and when they first arrive, it says she smelled the reservoir before she saw it. The steps ended in a doorway on the edge of a vast rectangular hall. The center remained unknown, cloaked in heavy darkness. Sabriel felt Touchstone touch her shoulder. Then she heard his whisper. "It's about waist deep. Try and slip in as quietly as possible." You know what? I did not know she was supposed to go into the water until that moment. They keep talking about going to the reservoir, and I'm figuring it's going to be like a fucking like Harry and Dumbledore in the cave in Half-Blood Prince kind of situation, where there's a little boat, you go to this island in the middle, and her dad is up on the island. No, it's not. It's not that easy. And like, when I realized that she was going to just have to go waist deep water, just walking through, I was just like, I hate it. So, combine that with the fact that there are broken charter stones that literally make her and Touchstone feel sick. Like, so sick that they almost can't perform magic later. That's fucked up. That seems unfair. I'm just saying. And it really has an effect. Like, she's basically got like that tinnitus, like ringing in her ears, and like a constant stomach cramp, like nausea. And she thinks that Mogget is going to jump on her, but Mogget decides to ride with Touchstone. And I'm curious what that's about. Like, is it just that Touchstone is not going into death and Mogget's aware of that, so he's going to stay with the one who's staying in life? Or is it that Mogget is afraid that, like, can Mogget strengthen Touchstone and she doesn't necessarily need that extra strength? I don't know. But I'm sorry, I'm just seeing Abbey says, I'm totally intending to commission it when we get to that point. Ooh. And if Natasha likes these books enough. Well, I like this book a lot. So they head out, and as they're heading out there occasionally, the sun keeps going behind clouds and making them very nervous because things get very dark. And we get some POV from Sabriel with how she is just like flipping out a little bit inside because of the feeling that they have stayed too long, that it's going to be dark when they get out, and that they're going to be like at the mercy of all the dead. And then we have a POV from Touchstone where he's like kind of having a PTSD moment of like seeing the blood in the water from the last time that he was here. Everything is bad. They get to this spot where her dad's body is. And it is getting worse and worse, this nausea that they're experiencing. And there's a white light that they're heading towards. And it turns out that the light is coming from a diamond of protection. And in the middle of it, there is a man-shaped figure. It says, "Empty hands outstretched, as if he had once held weapons," which I have to think are how he was holding what he wound up sending to her, the bells and everything. And when she gets there, they know that they have to set up a second diamond because she's going to go into death from there. It was not really planned, I don't think. The way that Sabriel says, "I think I'll have to go into death from here," and Touchstone like kind of goes, "Are you serious?" Obviously, they intended for her to find her dad's body, bring his body somewhere else, and then for her to like perform this ritual. But she's realizing that because of how this is all set up, it's probably not smart for them to move him. So they have to build this new diamond of protection, a bigger one. And it is a fucking process. They are really struggling because of the way these broken charter marks have affected them. And Mogget even, like she asks him whether he thinks that's a good idea. And Mogget's basically like, well, you know what? Listen, first of all, this is probably a trap. But second of all, I don't really know what else we can do. So kind of got to. And they create this diamond after a lot of hard work. She is like almost ready to double over and vomit, pass out, something. But once they get it done, the charter marks that are broken, the effect of them seems to be a little bit mitigated. And Touchstone had been like completely lost the feeling in his legs and feet due to it. I like that their reactions are different because Sabriel's, it's in her head. You know, there's it's almost like a migraine is the way that I think of it, with that high pitched pain combined with a stomach cramping and nausea. That makes me think of a migraine. Touchstone, his legs and feet were going numb, almost like he was like having a stroke or something. But yeah, so they managed to finally do this. And as they are preparing for her to cross over, there is a moment of them both like reflecting on the fact that they are attracted to each other. He like realizes he's holding her hand and drops it really suddenly. And in this like, oh, cooties sort of way. But a minute later, he realizes that she's super pretty. He hasn't really been looking at her that way. And then he like steps forward and kisses her on the cheek. And it's a kind of a cute, like awkward, weird moment. So she says, "It probably won't be a long wait for you. Time moves strangely in death. If I'm not back in 2 hours, then I'll probably be trapped too. So you and Mogget should leave." "I'll be waiting," replied Touchstone firmly. "And I'll wait, it seems," added Mogget, "unless I want to swim out of here, which I don't." So, he kisses her, says for luck, and it's adorable. And then she heads into death, which is super easy because of the broken stones nearby. And luckily, when she passes into death, the remaining grossness of having the other broken stones is completely obliterated. She can't feel that when she's in death. So that's cool anyway. That's a nice side effect. And when she heads forward, like, honestly, guys, when she said that she was passing through the gates, I started to panic a little bit because it just seemed like she just set it up so well that going through the gates is bad news bears. And when she decides that she's going to go into the fifth one, I was just like, bitch, there's literally only 2 left. You need to not do this right now. But when you're there, like, what are you supposed to not go save your dad when he's just 1 gate away? Like, what are you supposed to do? So this is so cool. She came to the first gate, halting just beyond the wall of mist that stretched out as far as she could see to either side. The river roared beyond that mist, turbulent rapids going through to the second precinct and on to the second gate. I would like to register my amusement that they're called precincts. I don't know why that's so funny to me, but it's, you know, it's just a weird word to use. You would think that it would be like realm or land or, I don't know, shadow world. I don't know. But precinct is so parochial. Like, what? So she goes through that one. That's the mist. Then she goes to the second gate, which is the one that's like a manhole cover, basically a drain that you drop down into. And the third one, when she gets there, it's not just a river like the other two. It's a friggin' wave, like that fucking, it seems really calm at first when you arrive until you realize that there's this like tsunami coming up behind you. And I should mention, on the way to the third one, she gets attacked by a creature. And this startled me because in the other moments that she's been attacked, we've kind of had like a bit of a POV from the creature that's coming at her. So we've known that it's coming. But this is described to us in the way that she would have experienced it. So there's no warning to us at all. It just says, a faint squelching sound behind her made her turn, sword scything around at full arm stretch, a great circle of charter-spelled steel. It struck dead spirit flesh, sparks flying, a scream of rage and pain filling the silence. Sabriel almost jumped back at that scream, but she held her ground. The second gate was too close. So, this fucking thing is standing there with its head hanging off and is about to try, and I'm going to read this to you because it's wrong and I hate it. It was humanoid in shape, at least to begin with, but had arms that trailed down below its knees into the river. Its head, now flopping on one shoulder, was longer than it was wide or tall, possessing a mouth with several rows of teeth. It had flaming coals in its eyes, in its eye pits, a characteristic of the deep dead from beyond the fifth gate. It snarled and brought its long, skewer-thin fingers up out of the water to try and straighten its head, attempting to rest it back atop the cleanly hewn neck. Listen, that's horrifying. That's like, there's so many pieces of that are so horrifying. Like, in the other creatures that we've met that I did not care for, there was an overall effect of horror. Segmented worm with a boar head. I mean, that's just a horrible combination. But this, it's like, it's got a long, weird head, rows of teeth. Its arms are so long they go down into the water, but its fingers can come up like almost separately from the arm. Like, they're so long and they're skewer thin. Oh, I hate it. Sabriel with great presence of mind, slashes again, and cuts off the head completely and cuts off one of its hands. And they just go bobbing down the river and go down the drain. But this thing just stands there, and it doesn't have a head, but it's not dead, which is just, again, unfair. And starts to like kind of feel around like if there's a way to get at her. And it finally like kind of missteps and falls into a deep hole. And it scrabbles for a minute. And then finally the water catches it up and pulls it away. But good Lord, that is like, I was not ready for it. I don't like it. So this is when she goes into the third section where there's the wave, and she has to outrun that thing. Barely manages to do it. And as she's running, we cut back to Touchstone up on the surface. I say up on the surface like she's literally underground, but that's what it feels like, so I'm going to stick with it. Touchstone stared out past the southern vertice, listening. He had heard something, he was sure. Something besides the constant dripping. Something louder, something slow, attempting to be surreptitious. He knew Mogget had heard it too, from the sudden tensing of cat paws on his shoulder. "Can you see anything?" "Yes," whispered Mogget. "The dead. Many of them, filing out of the main southern stair. They're lining up each side of the door along the reservoir walls." "What kind of dead are they?" "Hands," muttered Mogget. "All hands, and pretty putrescent ones, too. They're falling apart just walking." "Ew, it's so gross." So, they are lining up against the walls in ranks like an honor guard, and Touchstone realizes this probably means Kerrigor is here and coming, and they're preparing for him. Bad news. So, back to Sabriel. She is able to get to the 4th precinct. The current was strong again, but predictable. There were few dead because most were stunned and rushed through by the 3rd precinct's wave. So she manages to get into the 5th. And again, when I realized she was going all the way to 5th, I was just like, good God. But he wasn't in the 4th precinct. Sabriel reached the 4th gate without feeling any intensification of his presence. This gate was another waterfall of sorts, but it wasn't cloaked in mist. It looked like the easy drop of water from a small weir, a matter of only 2 or 3 feet down. But Sabriel knew that if you approached the edge, there was more than enough force to drag the strongest spirit down. She halted well back, and was about to launch into the spell that would conjure her path, when a niggling sensation at the back of her head made her stop and look around. The waterfall stretched as far as she could see to either side, and Sabriel knew that if she was foolish enough to try and walk its length, it would be an unending journey. Perhaps it eventually looped back on itself, but as there were no landmarks, stars, or anything else to fix one's position, you'd never know. No one ever walked the breadth of an inner precinct or gate. What would be the point? Everyone went into death or out of it. Not sideways, save at the border with life, where walking along altered where you came out. But that was only useful for spirit forms or rare beings like the Mordekin, who took their physical shape with them. Nevertheless, Sabriel felt an urge to walk along next to the gate, to turn on her heel and follow the line of the waterfall. It was an unidentifiable urge, and that made her uneasy. There were other things in death than the dead, inexplicable beings of free magic, strange constructs, and incomprehensible forces. This urge, this calling, might come from one of them. She hesitated, thinking about it, then pushed out into the water, heading out parallel to the waterfall. It might be some free magic summoning, or it might be some connection with her father's spirit. So, we cut back, then, to Touchstone, and they're trying to figure out what to do. Basically, there's nothing to be done. They just kind of have to wait. We can defend ourselves if we're attacked, I suppose, pray to the charter that Kerrigor doesn't come before Sabriel returns. And that's basically it. Cut back to Sabriel, and she finds her father. And she has to do this spell with the bells, 2 at once, which she has never done before, in order to, like, create a mouth for this creature that is sort of attached to her father's spirit. This is such a weird moment. Let's see. The dead creature finally hauled itself out, muscles differently arranged to a human's visibly straining along the forearms. It stood on the rim for a moment, bulky head questing from side to side, then lumbered towards Sabriel with that familiar rolling gait. Its jaw worked up and down, but no sound issued from its red and fleshy mouth. A black thread ran from its back, down into the rushing waters of the gate. So she pulls the 2 bells and does the 2 of them together. And it sort of, like, the sound seems to, like, wrap around this thing. And then she does another, and it sort of seems to, like, create a mouth. The creature's mouth moved again, and now it had a tongue, a horrid pulpy mess of white flesh that writhed like a slug. But it worked. The thing made several gurgling, swallowing sounds. Then it spoke with the voice of a person. Sabriel, I both hoped and feared you would come. Yikes. This is not awesome. This is not what I was hoping for. This is a creepy, creepy creature. He asks where her physical body is, like what's going on. When she tells him that Kerrigor is somewhere out there, he's like, yeah, I knew that had happened, and I have a feeling that he's, like, right nearby, so we need to get the fuck out of here. Do you remember how to ring 2 bells simultaneously? And when she does this, it manages to, and this is really a sad moment, actually. I remember, will they free you? The answer was slow in coming. Yes, for a time. Enough, I hope, to do what must be done. Quickly now. And this is her having to realize that he is too deep in death and can't ever really be alive again. That this is just the beginning of a goodbye. And she has to kind of, like, compartmentalize and put that out of her head. So she manages to free him. And he embraces her for, like, a second, but then they have to, like, sprint back. And she's asking him as they're running, what's happening? I don't understand. Why didn't you bring me up here so I would know things? And he's, like, in death. And she says, you know what I mean by here, the old kingdom. And he says, well, 1, to keep you safe, I needed to send you away. I'd already lost your mom. And second of all, things were getting really bad out here. And either it was going to be down to you being with me at all times, which was super dangerous, or me keeping you locked up at home like a prisoner, which was real bad also. So I decided to send you somewhere where you could get educated and have, like, a reasonable life before anything started to really go down. They said we needed someone, or will need someone, to who knows Ancestry. I didn't know why then, but I suspect I do now. Why? Asked Sabriel. Kerrigor's body, replied a person. Or Roger's, to give him his original name. He could never be made truly dead because his body is preserved by free magic somewhere in life. It's like an anchor that always brings him back. Every Abhorsen since the breaking of the great stones has been looking for that body, but none of us has ever found it, including me, because we never suspected it is in Ancestry. Obviously, somewhere close to the wall. That Claire will have located it by now, because Kerrigor must have gone to it when he emerged into life. So, ready to run? And they start to sprint ahead of the wave as he's continuing to explain. Kerrigor could never be properly dealt with till they found the body. We were just postponing the problem, and then we grew weaker as the kingdom deteriorated. And by we, he means all of the great charter bloodlines. And we finally have the chance to finish him once and for all. The Clare will direct you to his body. You will destroy it and then banish Kerrigor's spirit form, which will be severely weakened. After that, you can get the surviving royal prince out of his suspended state. And she's like, about that. And it turns out, he says, a bastard son, actually, and possibly crazy. Oh, but he's already... And he's like, well, I guess that plan's fucked. What are you going to do? And when she tells him, well, we did make a diamond of protection around him, he's like, yeah, that might not be enough to do the job. It's like something, but Kerrigor's pretty fucking strong at this point. And when she mentions Mogget, he's like, who's that? And she says, well, the little cat. And he says, oh, Mogget, I guess that was the one that always appeared as an albino dwarf boy to me. What? That's weird that it's like appears as different things to different people. And at this point, she expresses that she's a little frustrated. He says, we must hurry. I thought we were. This was not her idea of a heartfelt reunion between father and daughter. He hardly seemed to notice her, except as a repository for numerous revelations and as an agent to deal with Kerrigor. I have not been an ideal parent, I know. None of us ever are. When we become the Abhorsen, we lose much else. Responsibility to many people rides roughshod over personal responsibilities. So yeah, and this ends with, I must win a battle against a terrible enemy. Our parts now, which perforce we must play, are not father and daughter, but one old Abhorsen making way for the new. But behind this there is always my love. She gently pushed herself out of his embrace, and they started forward together toward the first gate, the first precinct, life, and then the reservoir. Dun dun dun. So I've gone over time a little bit. I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you very much to Abbey for commissioning this. Has been a lot of fun to cover. I hope that you guys are enjoying it. And the last one I have to do today is going to be the next installment of Broken Earth trilogy. So join me for that in about half an hour. And I'm just really enjoying this story. This has been a lot of fun. Abbey says, thank you for doing this when you're ill. Oh, girl, I'm doing a lot better. Trust me. So, all right, cool. I hope that you guys enjoy it. I will be seeing you soon with a new one. And until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.